Hi Joe, I wanted to thank you for your video response. I noticed that it's the first video that you've made, so I'm honored that you felt passionate enough about what I had to say that you wanted to jump into creating a video. I think that's great, and I hope you continue to make more. I went back and I watched my video, and I can see why you thought things that you thought. I can see where that train of logic came from. It seems like your biggest problem that you had was what I said about the bell curve, and you mentioned that the bell curve doesn't have any place in education. Every year I have to give my kids something called an educational assessment. Well, some of them. It's every 3 years. So a lot of times my kids will be due for their educational assessment. Now, the results of that educational assessment are based on a bell curve. This is the information that we use in order to decide, well, it helps us decide whether a child needs special education services or not. And a lot of that depends on how they are on that bell curve. So the bell curve really does have a lot to do with education. When they test the reading programs, the math programs, they talk about the bell curve. They talk about how it helps students who are, it makes students go up on the bell curve. I mean, the bell curve is everywhere. You can't just take it out. I mean, it may be in law, that's cool and all, but if you ask any psychologist, if you ask anybody that knows what they're talking about education, they'll tell you the same thing. You said something about proficiency doesn't have to do with average, and you're absolutely right on that. And I didn't mean to imply that. When I was talking about the bell curve, it was when it was talking about setting high standards was the category of when I was talking about the bell curve. I wasn't talking about proficiency at that time. At no point did I say that in order to be proficient you had to be average. What I did have, though, where I think you might have been confused, is it said average in the middle on that bell curve that I drew, and then it said students that are think school is really easy or something like that, and then students who have more difficulty with school. I think I had it on this side. Notice that I said less kids have a really hard time with school. I didn't say less kids are able to do well at school. Okay? I didn't say that these kids who are on the lower end aren't able to become proficient. I never said that. Okay? So please don't take it that way, and I want to make sure that I could explain that to you. I do teach special education. It's the kids who just don't make it in the regular education classroom. They all have learning disabilities. You said something about imposing the bell curve on my students. I don't impose the bell curve on my students. My students know nothing about their, what their scores are on educational assessments. They don't know that. I don't impose it on my kids. I think that was a very strong thing to say without knowing anything about my classroom and what I do in my classroom. I tell parents when their child enters my classroom that my goal, my goal for their child is to get them out of special education. That's my goal. My goal is to help their child achieve and to catch up with their same age peers. So to say that I'm imposing a bell curve on my kids is a really crappy thing to say, because you don't know what I do in my classroom. But again, I can see where you were coming from on that, because I got into talking about, some kids just have more trouble and the bell curve. I can see where you might have gotten fixated on that. So I don't totally blame you on that, but I did want to clarify that. Every state sets standards for adequate yearly progress. That's very true. I never said that it didn't, that the state didn't set standards for AYP. But at this point, I feel like it's not the AYP, it's not the standards that are to blame for our issue. It's that we're not taking into account the individuality of each student. Every kid is different, every kid learns different, and that's the problem with our education system, is they don't see that every child learns different and every child needs something different. They just say, okay, these are the standards for all children. These are what everybody needs to do in order to be proficient. It doesn't matter whether that person started off on a 3rd grade level and is now at a 4th grade level, but they're a 5th grader. It doesn't matter that they've improved an entire grade level that year. They're still not proficient because the state doesn't recognize that gain from 3rd grade to 4th grade in skills. They only will recognize that that child isn't proficient in 5th grade material. And that's why I think there's a huge problem. You talked about proficiency and how it's not set on a bell curve, and that's very true. At least in my state, because all I know about is my state, what they do is they have a mass amount of information that the student is asked to learn in the year. And what they do is they build on that every year, and this is in math and in reading and in writing. They reteach what they were taught quickly. They reteach the year before skill, and then they teach the current year skill, and then they do that every year in the primary grades, because all I know is up through grade 5. I don't know the rest. The problem with that is that they don't teach for mastery. The curriculum teaches to general understanding. So the students who need to spend more time, there isn't any time to go back and try it again or teach it in a different way. Basically, the teacher's got one shot for every kid in the class to learn it, and if you don't hit it, if you don't hit every kid on that shot, then you got to move on. If you have time at the end of the year, you might be able to go back to it a little bit. You might be able to go back to it in warm-ups at the beginning of class, 5 minutes, but some kids need more than that, and at least in the neighborhood that I teach in, a lot of kids need more than that. I hear it from the regular educators all the time, especially the classes where the kids really struggle. That they just wish that they had more time. In my opinion, what we need to do is we need to test the students at the beginning of the year on what they know of the upcoming curriculum, past curriculum, upcoming curriculum, maybe test 2 grades below up. So 5th grader would be tested on 3rd grade material through 5th grade material. Test them at the beginning of the year, and then test that child at the end of the year. It does take, I think it might take a little more effort because the data is going to be more difficult to graph, because you're not, you're comparing a student to a student versus a group to a group, and that takes more effort. But it seems like a lot of people are trying to shortcut it and make it less work, but the results are going to be less accurate. If you want to see improvement in a child, you need to test the child and then test the child again, and that's just straight educational good practices. You do a pre-test and a post-test. It's been done for decades, and for whatever reason, the government sees that as not being the best way to test kids. They would rather compare a group of students to the same age group of students the year earlier, which makes no sense at all. You also said something about the kids are destined, that I said the kids were destined to fail, and that's not what I was implying either. I wasn't implying the kids were destined to fail, and I think I've covered that. That I think you took what I said and you stretched it because you were upset with something that I said and you didn't listen to the rest of what I said. But I have utmost respect for you. I'm sure that you're learning wonderful things about education, and you're my hope. You are our hope as educators to help us fix No Child Left Behind and the future of education. Please help us. And even if you don't want to listen to me, if you get into the point where you're doing educational law, please talk to classroom teachers in all places. Talk to them in richer neighborhoods, in poorer neighborhoods, in ethnic neighborhoods. Talk to teachers, please. That's what I'm asking you. Okay, I'm done, but I do want to thank you for your video response. I'm not, mad at you or anything, because I could totally understand where you're coming from. Totally. Mad love, Mr. Joe. Mwah. Bye, honey.